समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The multinational investment bank Jefferies has said that Donald Trump's motivation for the 50% tariffs on India has nothing to do with trade, but with personal pique that he was not allowed to mediate between India and Pakistan, effectively debunking Trump's claims of having brokered that ceasefire during Operation Sindoor. Meanwhile, Pete Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, is doubling down on his lashing out against India, this time posting a photograph of Prime Minister Modi in meditation pose and lashing out at India for being responsible for what Navarro is now calling Modi's war. You heard that right. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is now being called India and more specifically Modi's war. Where is this headed? Is the Indo-US relationship broken beyond repair? This question becomes even more pertinent with the Prime Minister in Japan on his way for the SCO summit to China. I'm Barkha. You're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, the Prime Minister is in Japan, and on Sunday he will be in China, where he will be meeting with, of course, Xi Jinping, but Vladimir Putin as well. The Prime Minister may well have attended or not attended this SCO summit. We'll never know the answer to that, had the Trump tariffs of 50% not been slapped on India. Now that they're here, alongside pretty personal swipes coming day after day, Pete Navarro has now called India a laundromat for the Kremlin. He has called the Ukraine war Modi's war. And so it goes. Trump is careful to still call Modi a terrific guy, but then almost every day claims a role for himself in the halting of hostilities between India and Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. India says this is not true, doesn't deny the phone calls that came from America, but says this does not amount to mediation of any kind. With relations probably being more broken than one has seen in, I would say, several decades, it's hard to say how this can be resolved. Some suggest that Modi and Trump should talk. Others say that's where the problem is. That's the picture that Pete Navarro posted on X today, lashing out as he does almost daily at India. What next? As India moves cautiously towards engagement with China, Navarro has lashed out about that as well. But hasn't Trump effectively nudged India in that direction? Let me introduce a very distinguished panel of experts as we continue to try and decode the mystery of Trump's tariffs. In Hindi, they would say, Donald Trump ko gussa kyun aata hai? What's the reason behind Donald Trump's anger? Welcoming first up to the program, Chidanand Rajkhatta, senior journalist and columnist based out of the US. Good to see you, Chidanand. Also, a great pleasure to see after a while Lisa Curtis. She, of course, is with the CNAS, but she has also served with the first Trump administration. Good to see you, Lisa. Also, I want to welcome to the program Peter Navarro, who's with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good to see you, Peter. And also joining us is Arnab Ray, an author and analyst based out of the United States of America. Thank you very much, everybody. Lisa, I've got to start with you. A lot is being said about Trump, Trump 1.0 being different from this time around, but that's for psychotherapists or those who know him personally. If you just had to take an overview of what's going on, it seems to have entered a realm of the absurd, quite frankly, because to hear Russia's invasion of Ukraine now being called Modi's war is pretty much as crazy as it can get. What's actually going on here? Jefferies has a report out today that says that this has everything to do with Trump's personal pique. That's the phrase they use. And that, in fact, Trump is angry because he wasn't allowed to play a kind of mediatory role between India and Pakistan. How do you see it?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I think that Peter Navarro's comment, particularly his comment that this is Modi's war, is very unfortunate and very unhelpful. The situation just is going from bad to worse with comments like that. But I do think behind the scenes there are officials on both sides in India and the United States talking with each other, trying to figure out a roadmap for a way ahead, because they recognize that this relationship is too important to allow this kind of deterioration. And you talked about the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2. I was in the first Trump administration. There was an effort, we had the Indo-Pacific strategic framework, our Indo-Pacific strategy, which prioritized working with India to be able to manage China's rise. Well, what is Trump 2 doing? Trump 2 is alienating India, destroying the confidence of India in the United States, confidence that had been, we've been trying to build for the last 25 years, Republican and Democratic administrations alike. And he is forcing India to have to accommodate China. And I think that's what we are seeing happening with his attendance at the SCO. I don't think that he'll agree to do a trilateral meeting with Russia and China, but the fact that India is even considering a trilateral meeting, a Russia, India, China trilateral meeting, really tells us just how deeply this relationship between the United States and India is deteriorating. And I don't think it's too late to turn it around. I think that we could see a trade agreement, but each side needs to take steps forward. Each side needs to make some kind of concession to bring us out of this morass that we find ourselves in.
Lisa, you said that you still see a path ahead. In what shape and form do you see that path? And the reason I ask this is opinion here is really divided on whether a sort of breaking the ice or a thaw is possible at the level of the two principles, or whether that's the level at which something has soured. We in India hear about a very acrimonious phone call that took place between Trump and Modi on the 17th of June. Donald Trump wanted Prime Minister Modi to come to Washington on a day when Pakistan's army chief was also in Washington. No Indian Prime Minister would agree to that. So I'm just wondering whether you see this as a personal friction point between the two leaders, or is there something else going on here?
Well, I don't think there's personal friction between the two leaders. I think that Trump does feel a bit slighted by India not recognizing the Trump administration's role in effectuating a ceasefire between India and Pakistan in May. He definitely is angry and frustrated about that. Mm-hmm. But this is also about Russia, because right now Trump's singular focus is on trying to end the Russia-Ukraine war. And so, this has become very important, India's reliance on Russian oil imports. However, you asked about, what is the way forward? Well, the first step would be for people like Peter Navarro to, take this offline, to stop issuing these provocative criticisms of India. That is very unhelpful. Second, I think that India should recognize that by Trump naming Sergio Gore, one of his closest political aides, to be ambassador to India is significant. It shows that Trump still cares about the U.S.-India relationship. So I think that should be recognized in India. Also, I think the U.S. should recognize that India has been decreasing its oil imports from Russia. From what I can gather, the state-owned oil companies in India have been reducing their dependence on Russian oil imports. There's still a ways to go, but I think these steps should be recognized on either side, and they should plan more steps for reducing tensions.
Well, in the middle of these tensions, India's envoy to Russia has actually said that India will buy oil from wherever it gets the best deal. And let me bring in Peter at this point. I think for most Indians, if not all, Peter, this would be a debate about sovereignty, about the right of an independent country to make its own decisions. as Americans would. You've worked with the Biden administration. Time was when there was bipartisan support for deepening Indo-US ties, right? Lisa's worked with Trump, you've worked with Biden. I don't think, at one point there would have been a radical difference in how both administrations saw the relevance of India. What has happened? This is, I know Lisa says it's not broken. I think in India, there's a sense that trust can never come back, that this is the peril of having trusted America too much.
Well, let me echo Lisa and thanking you for having me on the show. And I also want to echo a point Lisa made about the importance of the relationship. And well, it is clearly some friction in the relationship now. And I don't want to in any way minimize the very real impact that the tariffs starting today are having on Indian businesses. I do think that, looking at it from the perspective of the United States, looking at it from Washington, there is still bipartisan support, and there is a deep and profound understanding, whether it is in our economic policy community or whether it is in our national security policy community, that we here in the United States and you in India, we need to have a good political relationship. We are going to have to figure out how to get through the current tensions. And I think that, as Lisa suggested, that is going to take both sides getting through these tensions, which we have to get through, is going to take both sides taking some steps forward to try to improve those ties. Let me comment a little bit on where I see some similarities in the Trump approach from its term one, but also where I see some profound differences in its approach to geopolitics and international economics, which is different in Trump's second term than it was during his first term. When I look at Trump's economic policies during his second term as compared to his first term, his international economic policies, his trade policies, I actually think that President Trump is a little bit less relatively China focused during his second term than he is during his first term. During his first term, his tariffs were principally focused on China. They were principally, even his trade deals, like his North America USMCA deal, there was actually a lot in that deal that was about getting China out of the North American economy as a whole. Very China-focused policy. I think what you're seeing this time is Trump is taking, first from an economic policy perspective, a little bit different of approach of, well, China may be our number one economic problem. He is also trying to resolve what he sees as bilateral economic problems with other countries, right? So that's why he put tariffs on many countries around the world, including India, but not limited to India, right? And why he's been trying to strike deals with Vietnam, he struck a deal with the European Union, he struck a deal with the United Kingdom. And he really wants these deals because he's not just trying to deal with China economic issues. He's trying to deal with what he sees as an importance in resetting America's bilateral economic relationships around the world. And India, I think, to that, and why he's been so focused, and unfortunately why India has faced pressure on that, is because he actually understands for the U.S., getting the U.S.-India economic relationship right on the economics is incredibly important. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. 10 years from now, India is going to be, really among the largest economies in the world. And this is Trump's moment to make sure that India goes through this large economic rise that's coming, that makes sure we have what in his view is a fair and equitable relationship. And that's why you're actually seeing him fight so hard. Hard for India to take, but that's why he's fighting.
So you actually think it's about economics, Peter?
So I think a lot of this is about economics. I actually think even the Russia oil tariffs are in some sense because he wants a deal with India on the trade front. Now, part of that is he wants India to buy American oil rather than Russian oil, for sure, right? He sees that as part of the deal. But I actually do think this is a lot about economics. And that makes me optimistic we can work our way through it because, you can get a deal.
So the interesting thing is that I think nobody in India believes this is about oil. They may think it's about India drawing some red lines around sectors that have traditionally been protected, like farming, dairy, fishing. But Chidanand, let me bring you in. You try to analyze how much truth there is to the fact that that the Prime Minister Modi, avoided phone calls, attempts by Trump to reach out. That's what a German daily reported, Dainik Jagran reported. I know you in the Times of India had a column on this. What's going on with that story? That's the part that I'm not being able to actually figure out here. From everything one hears, there is something that went south in that phone call between the two leaders. That does not mean that it can't be picked up again. Diplomacy is the art of the possible. But what's your read? Chidanand, you're muted at your end. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Definitely, there is a communication breakdown at the highest level. That's very obvious. It's not just missed phone calls. I don't know whether it was deliberate, or accidental. But even in terms of visits, that the Prime Minister actually turned down a visit, a stopover in Washington on his way back from Canada, you get a general sense that in Washington they've just let loose the dogs of war. It's not just Peter Navarro, it's Scott Bessent, it's Lindsey Graham, and some of the language they are using is quite offensive. And they all take their cue from President Trump. And it seems to me that President Trump has essentially decided that India is a dispensable ally now. And China is more important. And the reason for that is very obvious. And I think they've articulated in as many words. China has leverage. India has no leverage. The other thing is, I think in India, there was a misreading that personal chemistry would carry this relationship forward. And now that has soured. And there are reasons for that. If anybody has read Trump's Art of the Deal, the core principle of Art of the Deal is winner takes all. It's a zero-sum game. There is a winner and there is a loser. His approach is take no prisoners. And a lot of world leaders have endorsed that. If you heard the South Korean president who was here last week, he actually said, I read Art of the Deal before I came here and played according to it. And what President Trump loves is big announcement, big ticket announcement, big numbers, 500 billion. And if he had played to that, he would have been very happy. Unfortunately, our system is, when Prime Minister was visiting Washington in February, there was a long joint statement and fact sheet running into, 5,000 words, 25 pages. If you tell me President Trump has reads 25-page notes, you can sell me that white building down the road. I mean, he loves big.
But if I had to distill it, sorry, I'm interrupting you. It's also that India hasn't in this moment sucked up. Pakistan has said Trump should get a Nobel Prize. India, I think, was very angry that Trump made the announcement of the hostilities between India and Pakistan before India could. And I think it's actually gone down, everything's gone south from there.
Exactly. And that's actually one of the other core principles of Art of the Deal. He very clearly says, think big, talk big. He actually calls it truthful hyperbole. That's the expression he uses. It's essentially a euphemism for BS, right? So you just put out big numbers. Nobody knows. I mean, the Japanese are, baffled when they go back that he actually said 500 billion. Where do we find this to invest? And I think that's tough in the Indian system, right? You can't, tell your people you announced, 500 billion investment in the US. So there's a lot of grandstanding and there's a wariness, and that in part explains the reluctance to not just receive phone calls but even visit, because like the whole episode with Asim Munir visiting and inviting Modi, there is abundant caution. And now that you have Scott Bessent and company letting loose, this has gone downhill very rapidly. The magic number, by the way, I'll tell you, which India has to watch out, and pretty much rest of the world, is 1240. It's 1,240 days till January 2029, right? And
so you're basically saying you've got to just survive till Trump's second term ends. I want Orna
survive and navigate 3.5 years of time.
But a lot may change in that time. I want Ornav to come in briefly. I know Lisa has to hop off a little early. So Ornav, if you want to just come in for your opening comment, and I'll take a quick word from Lisa and then we'll go around the panel again. Ornav, the point is, I think what a lot of Americans don't get is that we're not quite yet a post-colonial country. We may argue about a lot of things, but as Indians, one of the things that really irritates us is if somebody tells us how to do things, how to conduct your foreign policy, where to buy your oil, sit down, thank us, say you should be nominated for the Nobel, etc. A lot of this is coming from the sense also of Indians being riled and being told what to do.
Yes, of course, one of the things that has distinguished India versus Pakistan with respect to US diplomacy is that Pakistan has always been willing to play the US game. They got on to the lobbying thing first. Indians had a principled stance of not being lobbyists. So some of our foreign policy is still driven by Nehruvian ideals. And let's all agree that Donald Trump is as far away from the Nehruvian ideal of what a statesman should be that we can imagine. So I think that Indians were kind of caught flat-footed with respect to Trump too. Trump, one, was he was still figuring out the ropes. In my opinion, he didn't think he would be elected. So there was not really the people around him. He was still managed by a lot of people around him. And so you never really saw Trump as he was supposed to be. This is really Trump too, because he's now figured it out. That's one thing. And the other thing is that this is a facetious point, but there was a BJP ad a year ago which was lampooned in India, where it was Papa ne war rukwa di. Well, that was exactly what today Peter Navarro was saying, that Modi has this power to stop the war in Ukraine, which is about as ridiculous a thing that I've heard coming from somebody at his level. The last thing that I would like to say is that one of the things that happens, and this is especially true about X threads and Fox News appearances, these are direct appeals to President Trump. He follows everything on social media and he watches Fox News. So whenever these operatives, they come on Fox News and X, it is basically a conversation with the president rather than for everybody else. So maybe some of us in India might feel insulted, but he's not actually talking to us. It's actually a private conversation between him and the president.
I've heard a ton of Indian diplomats sort of basically echoing some Michelle Obama-esque, when they go low, we go high, and just don't respond. I don't know if that's a way forward. Lisa, let me bring you in. I know you need to hop off early, but your sense, Peter says, this is actually about trade. And there is a section of opinion that believes it's about trade. But most people, if you speak to Indians, will say it's not about trade. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that Trump himself is laying out the red carpet for Putin. If the Alaska summit had gone better, then this whole idea of a penalty for the purchased Russian oil would be off the table. The second is India buys crude oil from Russia, but when it's refined, the European Union buys $15 billion worth of oil imports. The Americans buy $3 billion of it. And then, of course, there's Europe's uptick in taking liquefied gas from Russia itself. In other words, everybody thinks this whole debate around Russian oil is hypocritical. What's actually going on here? What is going on here? What is Trump so exercised over?
So I don't think it's just about trade. I think it's become very complicated. I think that, as I said before, it does have something to do with his irritation that India will not acknowledge his role in getting a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. But we have to move on from that, because I think Modi is in a political place where he cannot thank Trump for his role in helping to diffuse the India-Pakistan crisis. That's not going to happen. So we have to look forward. So that I think is a contributing factor. I think another contributing factor is that he got such good deals for the United States with South Korea, Japan, where they committed, even the EU committed to hundreds of billions of investment in the United States, something India simply can't do. So I think that is a contributing factor why he has raised the bar on the deal with India. But as I said before, it really is true that he wants to end the Russia-Ukraine war, and he does believe that India's purchases of Russian oil are helping Russia to continue to prosecute that war. I think a lot of Indians are having trouble digesting that because the Biden administration was quiet on that issue. But I just can't emphasize enough, this is a new administration. And, when Trump gets focused on something, like he's focused on the Russia-Ukraine war, he is going to be a dog with a bone when it comes to trying to get India to reduce and finally end its imports of Russian oil. And India can do this. India didn't import hardly any Russian oil before February 2022. It's taking advantage of discounted prices. I see that. But, I believe that we could go a long way in diffusing this crisis in India-U.S. relations if India were to reduce its reliance on Russian oil imports. And I'm so sorry, but I have to leave now.
Just a 10-second. Any guesses on why he's so soft on Pakistan suddenly before you go?
Because Pakistan nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. It's pretty simple.
Okay, Lisa Curtis, we let you go. Thank you for your comments. Carrying on the conversation, let me bring in Peter. Lisa, thank you. Peter, you think it's mostly about trade, right? And Lisa thinks that there's genuine concern about the purchase of Russian oil. But actually, when we had the previous ambassador from America to India, Eric Garcetti, he's actually on record saying that America was on board with the purchase of Russian oil because it was needed to stabilize oil prices. There's some sort of pact between countries here that India takes the crude, refines it, sells it on to Europe. And guess what? Petroleum products are exempt. They're exempt from the 50% tariff. So in India, nobody believes that this is about Russian oil. Secondly, Indians might turn around and say, it's not anybody's business where we buy our oil from. We're not telling the Americans what to do. The Americans can't tell us what to do. Having served in the Biden administration, just heard Lisa say, that government did not make an issue of this. Was it an issue for the Biden administration, or was there an understanding that there was a churn and oil prices globally need to be stabilized? And, it was understood.
Yeah, so the Biden administration had a different strategic concept on how to deal with the Russian oil issue than the Trump administration does. The Biden administration strategic concept was essentially Russia at that point was exporting 4 or 5 million barrels of oil a day, mostly to Europe. We had sort of a view of if all that oil went off the markets globally all at once, the prices would go through the roof. So the idea that the Biden administration was promoting was essentially, let's leave the Russian oil on the market, but try to get the buyers of that Russian oil, like India, to pay a lower price for it. So Russia would get less dollars for its oil, even though it would still be selling, similar volumes of oil. So that was kind of the idea of we'll reduce the money Russia is getting without reducing the volumes. Now that was a concept we came up with, 2-3 years ago now, and the world has changed a lot then. And so I think it is not unfair of the Trump administration to now look at this situation and say, well, this war is still ongoing. The Biden administration tried to reduce dollars paid for oil, but now we also want to go after volumes of oil. Like it's 3 years later and a different strategic concept. But I also think this Russia oil thing for Trump is about the economics, because I think one of the things that really bothers Trump on the economic side of the Russian oil issue is that what's happening is that Russia, as you note, is selling oil to India, some of which is then being refined in India, and some of which is then being sold to Europe. Trump wants to sell American oil to Europe. And in fact, Europe has said it will buy American oil as part of the US-EU trade deal. So this idea that India is buying cheap Russian oil and then selling refined product to Europe actually, in Trump's mind, I think is hurting his goal of exporting American oil. So I think for Trump, this Russian oil issue is partly sincere, as Lisa says. He wants to put more pressure on Russia, but he's also now thinking about it in kind of a mercantilist way of I'd rather countries buy my oil than Russian oil.
I think that the mercantilist dimension is really important, Shidan. And when we think of the fact that the Trump administration is actually taking now a 10% markup on all weapons it's selling to Europe that then provides them to Ukraine. And they've made no bones about it, right? I think the Wall Street Journal had a report about 4 countries in Europe buying $1 billion worth of weapons. Trump's looking to monetize this war. And they may say it's to pay for air cover or whatever, but in the end, he's a businessman. So when you hear Peter say it is about money, do you agree with that, or do you think it's about something even more basic, and to us it seems implausible, about flattery? Lisa's last comment before going was, yeah, he's soft on Pakistan because Pakistan basically sucked up to him.
Right. Yeah. So the answer to this is all of the above. It's the whole, Pakistan thing, resolving the war. It's trade, A, B, C, D, all of the above. Then it depends on which has more weightage. I mean, clearly this Russian, I can understand, the Trump administration and the president's motivation about ending the war. But just because India stops buying Russian oil won't end the war. I mean, look, the Russians are, people who defeated Hitler, Napoleon, scorched, they'll go scorched earth, before they go down. So I don't believe that that is the sole motivation. And the fact is, look, the argument that Besant and others are making is, oh, Indians are enriching themselves. It's a laundromat. They're making money. I mean, this is coming from, a cabinet of plutocrats, billionaire plutocrats serving a billionaire autocrat. And this is a town of grifters. I mean, let's be blunt about it. There's a lot of money being made right now. And the money, assuming they're right that India is making a lot of money, it's the same money which also buys American guns and planes and tanks. Money is fungible. You don't just, it's not just Russia. So that whole argument, I mean, to me, it doesn't seem, it's not just the only reason. There are even greater pathologies, and I think some of them is a personal pathology. And then the grandstanding, what's happened now is because of all this very public grandstanding and, lecturing and hectoring India, it puts India and Prime Minister Modi in a corner. If this had gone through back channels, it's entirely possible. And after all, India had stepped up buying, American energy.
And one of the things you wrote in your column is that when you look at this report that Modi was hesitant to talk to Trump, you tell a very interesting story about Trump's, lack of discretion, about how his mobile number is sort of available. He's been known to call into, let's say, Fox News breakfast and give his comments. Talk a little bit about this hesitation that the Prime Minister may have felt in talking to him on the phone.
Yeah, because of this grandstanding, his compulsive need to, rush. For instance, the whole India-Pakistan truce. Assuming, let's credit him with some role in it, not direct mediation. He did not call Prime Minister Modi, but he told J.D. Vance to call Prime Minister Modi. And okay, J.D. Vance spoke to Mr. Modi. And now it seems from what President Trump said, he spoke to the Pakistani side. He doesn't say who he spoke to, but he suggests that he spoke to the Pakistani side. And it was the Pakistanis that he said, I'll use trade. You won't get a trade deal if you don't stop. Right? But the compulsive need to go public with this immediately, if you remember, the India and Pakistan hadn't even announced the truce when he rushed to his social media platform and said, I brought this about. That kind of grandstanding really paints countries in a corner, and particularly with regard to buying oil. I mean, this is sensitive. And look, India buys oil from, when I last checked, from at least a dozen countries, including Nigeria, Venezuela, Gulf countries, Iran, Iraq, UAE, and that's India's prerogative. You spread out because buying oil is also a function of foreign policy, of keeping friends and allies happy. So you simply can't dictate that buy oil from X, don't buy oil, particularly when it's very obvious that China and European Union are also feeding off Russian energy, and they don't face the kind of sanctions. So there's something very, very fundamental. And of course, there's always the tariff issue, which Trump has spoken about for years, and that I truly believe it's an article of faith.
And by the way, you mentioned Venezuela and Iran. India did pull back from those oil purchases, but I think had Trump handled this in a more discreet way, back channeling instead of front channeling, I think you might have seen a decision making, irrespective of whether you agree with that decision making or not. You may have seen a different decision making. Arnab, I want to bring you in. You said this is the real Trump. We didn't see the real Trump in administration 1. We now see the real Trump. Having seen the real Trump, what now? I mean, people like you, Chidaran, America is also your home. There is a kind of, I agree with Chidaran, it no longer seems like a disagreement about trade. Everything about India is now under attack. H-1B visas are directly linked based on dodgy facts to the Indian American community. This seems to have got very personal. Even Navarro's post today, the photograph he chose of Modi, the sort of it all seems very deliberate. Now, maybe it's just leverage. Maybe it's just what happens when things go south. How do you see it? How does this impact your life in America?
So for me, maybe it doesn't affect my life in America that much, because if I was 30 years old on an H-1B, it absolutely would. I fortunately was here during the Obama era, so things like this did not happen. And the reason why I brought up Obama is I want to bring up something which I believe personally drives Trump far more than people will accept, and that is Barack Obama. Trump, in my opinion, it's not just my opinion, decided to throw his hat into the presidential ring on a very personal basis. It was a White House Correspondents' Dinner when Obama stood up and made fun of his hair. Now, you can normally wonder, seriously, the history of the world changes based on this? Yes, it does. History of the world, if you've noticed, sometimes changes on a knife's edge. One word, one gesture, that's it. So then he's decided, and then Obama also went on one of the comedy shows and he did one of these, so they read out mean tweets. So he did one which was viral where he basically taunted Trump and said, well, the difference between you and me is I'm a president, you'll never be. Okay, so Obama picked this very personal beef here, I'm successful, you're not, which kind of hits very hard to a person like Trump, who went after Obama's birth certificate, if you remember. That's where this whole beef thing started. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to put the last tag in I beat Obama. What's the last thing that's left? The Nobel Prize. You would wonder why Trump is so obsessed over the Nobel Prize. Where did this come from? It doesn't seem to be an obvious thing that Trump would go for, right? It's not somebody who, with that uber macho American image, would want to go for a Nobel Prize from the Swedes. So why would he even care? That's the reason. And I think the problem started, again, we sometimes overanalyze many of the things that come out from the Trump administration, but it is an extremely personality-driven administration. And again, there's a bigger reason, which I think is much more interesting, as to why that came to be in a country that we've always thought to have very strong democratic traditions, to within 1 or 2 years jettison all of it and essentially go all in for one individual. This is something we in India are very used to. This has driven our democracy. But we normally used to like to think, this is only Indian thing. No, it's not. This is a human thing, actually. So that's a very interesting topic. But with respect to Trump, where we go from there, what is happening, unfortunately, is that there has been, there is kind of, as part of Trump's support base, there is a very strong anti-India core of that. And that in Trump 1 was kind of suppressed. It was more against illegal immigrants. That was the legal immigration. Yes, they kind of tried to whittle away at it. But if you really look, the core of Trump's base is essentially their main problem is with Indians taking their jobs. That is the main thing. It is not illegal immigrants.
Or the mythology of Indians taking their jobs.
Yes, whatever. They believe that Indians are this public face of the source of their decline in American influence. Again, whether it's true or not is another thing, but that is what they have been led to believe. Now, with Trump's administration and with this very personal beef that he now has with India, that has kind of opened the floodgates for India hate on X. Also, there is a lot of it is also driven by Musk's algorithm, which previously in Trump 1 was still controlled. His hate would not be put front and center. But now with the Musk's algorithm, it's different, right? So maybe people ask me, do you face this in real life? Absolutely not. Nothing has changed. The moment I close my laptop, nothing will change. But on X, it's unbelievable what I see now.
Yeah. So let's get last comments on China. And the reason I bring up China, and I'll come to you, Peter, on this. A lot of people in India believe, you made an interesting comment. You said Trump 2.0 is not so China focused. A lot of people believe that Trump might want to, if he could, make a deal with China. And then this positioning of India as a countervailing force to China in Asia is not as important to him. I'm not saying that's India's only relevance. I'm not saying that's how India sees herself, but I'm saying that has long been conventional foreign policy, or India is the democratic force to support against China. Do you think that Trump is very keen to close a deal with China? How might he be looking at India's edging edging engagement, with China, increasing engagement with China?
So I think of all the people in the Trump administration, President Trump is by far the most bullish on his chances of making a deal with China. I think if you look at folks like Secretary of State Rubio or Secretary of Defense Hegseth, these are guys who are frankly quite skeptical of making a deal with China. They think it is, unlikely that we could get a fair deal with China. And they also think, China is a strategic adversary. And so, we really do need to line up countries like India as a counterbalance to China. I think Trump, I think he doesn't know if he can get there with a deal with China, but I think he, more than anyone who works for him thinks, I'm the guy who could get to a deal with China. And we see him, potentially looking at a summit this fall with Xi, potentially as a part of that, having a trade deal with China. So I think one of the reasons he has been willing to put so much pressure on India is that he feels he may need India less vis-a-vis China than, say, the Biden administration thought it needed India, or even Trump during his first administration. I think Trump is just more optimistic about a deal with China. Now, I remain, as an analyst, quite skeptical that the U.S. will reach to a durable deal and détente with China. I think, Trump may get some kind of summit where they announce some parameters of a, partial deal with a little bit of tariff reduction, and China will agree to invest in the U.S. and this kind of thing. I think they'll get there. I think there are huge structural tensions between the U.S. and China that mean over the longer term, maybe later in Trump's term, certainly beyond Trump, we're not going to have a durable deal with China. And so I think there's a broad American recognition that we need India on sides. And that's why one of the reasons India is such an important relationship to us. But I very much agree. Trump right now is thinking, maybe I can cut a deal with China. And so maybe I don't need India as much as, President Biden thought we needed India.
Yeah. But briefly, Peter, isn't what Trump thinks eventually going to drive policy? I think one of the things that Indians and Indian diplomats have struggled to get used to is this very personality-driven decision-making, right? Like so you're right that maybe his entire administration, like you, is skeptical about a deal with China. But if Trump's got his head fixed on it, he might push in that direction.
So that is why I think we probably will see some sort of announcement of a partial deal this fall. I think Trump wants one. What we have seen in his administration, much more so, and Lisa was talking about this, and Arnab was talking about this, much more so than during his first administration. This is, Trump driving his administration top down, right? He is definitely in charge of this administration, and he's not being managed the same way he was. So I think he will push through getting a deal. I just don't think that deal is going to be durable, because I think, A, Trump changes his mind, B, the Chinese will be pushing on U.S. interests that will, even if we get a deal for a year and a half, that will ultimately make Trump change his mind. And C, longer term, even if Trump is able to kind of hold a deal together during his term, it's not going to be a deal the American political establishment believes in longer term.
Arnab, how do you see the China factor? I mean, one of the reasons I think so many Indians are confused about what's happening is because globalization for a section of India's elite has actually meant Americanization. So if you ask a generation of Indians, they'll have stories about their children in America or their own education in America. This is, of course, a very elite, minuscule percentage of India, but nevertheless, many of those elites are decision makers in India. Many of them are bureaucrats, many of them are diplomats, many of them are politicians, right? And this does matter. And there's very little cultural affinity with China. There's very little cultural relatability with China. And it isn't just about culture. China just backed Pakistan in Operation Sindoor actively, not just by providing weapons, but by actually providing live inputs. And here we are, Hobson's choice, having to do business with China, all because of Trump's, sorry to say, craziness.
Well, with respect to China, one of the things that is one of the bulwarks of US policy has always been there's been a moral aspect to it, that India is a democracy and that we need, and China is not a democracy, and that it's not just a question of two similarly strong countries acting as counterweights to each other, but ideal for China to strive towards. Hey, look, this is another country with a colonial background, just like you. They're a democracy, they're a strong country, but Trump does not recognize that value. Let's be. I mean, I think we'll all agree to it. The way China sees it, the way Trump sees India, is that in terms of power, in terms of military power or economic power, they're nowhere close to China. So the only thing he sees is power. So because of the power asymmetry, he no longer sees that India can be a counterweight to China. He does not see India's soft power that China does not have in terms of global influence, which is one of the things which sometimes people overlook. But Trump really doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of that. What he sees is, I don't need India. That's number one. Two, given where India are, they didn't do what I said, which was basically back me that I solved the India-Pakistan issue. So they're not powerful. They didn't do what I asked for. And then he looks at the data and they haven't played ball with us. And the fourth thing is the first thing that I said, that the Indian Foreign Office is much more, they still suffer from that non-alignment Nehruvian thing, that is very different from the way Trump does business. It's very much big talk, public announcements. It's all for the television studios and ratings. He always says ratings. Ratings are very important to him. And India has failed on all of these fronts for Trump.
So let me give the last word to Chidanand by just picking up a couple of interesting audience comments, right? There's Saurabh Vishisht who says, for India and the US, China is the most important relationship. India should focus on managing its trade and political relationship with China. The US has shown its hand. India is peripheral to them. I think this is actually not so far from what you said, that Trump sees India as a dispensable ally.
Except that, I'd agree with that, with the qualifier that India is dispensable to the Trump White House.
Yeah, not to the United States of America, but to Trump. And I think we have to not conflate the two. Yes.
The thing is, there are a lot of bureaucrats and officials, both Republican and Democratic, who have invested a lot of time and energy in this relationship for 25 years. That includes Peter, Lisa, many people. And in some sense, actually, they are the firewall. The comment I heard yesterday from an Indian diplomat I spoke to is they're trying to firewall this whole crisis by keeping trade separate from, say, the military engagement, science, technology, other stuff, which is actually happening in the background. None of that has been affected so far. That's one. And two, I definitely agree, as Arnab said, Trump has realized there is almost a sense now of he's trying to get to a G2, US and China. And because the numbers show that despite all our, talking up India and its potential and its promise, India is a distant third in terms of, will be a distant third for at least another quarter century, 20 years. So that understanding is there. And you sense that, we will know the answer to this, by the way, in a couple of months. If Trump gets back to Quad and comes to India for Quad, that the India the Indo-Pacific strategy is still alive. India has some role in containing China. But if he doesn't come, then you know that he's given up on that. One other issue with President Trump is he's very transactional and short term. I mean, if you see his career, his political career, literally he's abused every one of his, not just cabinet colleagues, but people close to him in the political system. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, they've all been trashed by him. He badmouths them. And once they, kiss up to him, they're back in his orbit. It doesn't work with nations, and most certainly with India. I don't think President Trump or his inner circle who are engaged in this campaign of vilification realize that this is going to, this will last another 20, 25 years. It's not like you're going to come to the Quad, sing praise and say, oh, everything's fine. Let's get on with it. Anyone who's lived through, 1971 or 1998 knows, that these things linger for a long time in India. And I don't think, at least the MAGA Republicans, the Trump Republicans, are not going to get back into favor in India.
I think that's such an important thing you've just said, because what I do want to say in the end is that I think Trump has shown that he doesn't understand India. And India is a big meta idea. It's tough to sort of argue that this is true and this is not true. But one thing that is true is this sense of pride as a nation that is still a young nation, that is not fully post-colonial, that still remembers its history of having to have fought for its independence from the British, and the sense of umbrage and being bullied. I think that's very deep, and it's across politics, and it's across political and ideological affiliations for, I think, all Indians. And I think that's what has been Trump's misreading of India. But we leave it there. We certainly, as the Chinese would say, live in interesting times. We have a very significant weekend coming up. A lot of reactions are going to come from the Navarro gang when Modi, Putin, and Xi Jinping meet. I'm not a big fan of the India-China engagement, given what's just happened between India and Pakistan. But that's the nature of diplomacy. It changes and turns on a dime. We leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, to Peter Harold, to Arnab Ray, to Chidanand Rajghata, earlier to Lisa Curtis. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you. See you tomorrow. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.